nonfiction.
You are listening to Fiction.
Or nonfiction.
Yeah, this is the show where we talk about viral news stories, urban legends, popular tales, and determine whether they are true or false, if they're based in fact, or if they are complete fabrications. I'm Adam, here with Dave. This is the second episode of Season 2.
It is. And when I come up with stuff for the episode, it's usually a little different than when you come up with stuff. You're better.
I wouldn't say that.
But what I tend to do is well, lately anyway, the last couple episodes we did towards the end of last season was I would take something that has existed for a long time and try to kind of trace its origin and go from there.
And I like this because for our Verner's episode, as an example, you would kind of unpack some of the myths around, is this legend true? For example, how it was created, or how long Verner's has been around for. So there's a lot of small legends to unpack around stuff like this. We also did an episode about Ozzy Osbourne biting the head off a bat.
Yes, we did do that.
He bit the head off a bat. He didn't wear a nice hat. I misheard that when I was younger. So yeah.
Okay, so on this episode, I'm going to talk about, yes, you guessed it, universities.
Those are true.
What I'm here to talk about is, when was the first university and where?
Oh,
okay.
Interesting.
According to the Guinness World Records, the oldest and first university in the world, I need you to tell me if this is fiction or nonfiction, okay?
I'll do my best.
So according to the Guinness World Records, as the oldest or first university in the world, that goes to Harvard University, founded in 1636, as it claims to be the oldest institution of higher education in the United States.
Now, you see, that's interesting because you can talk about educational institutions, and certainly, Harvard has a certain pedigree behind it. It might be the oldest established American university, but, I'm also thinking about in ancient Greece how they had symposiums and they had schools for thought. Like, would those count as universities, like
right.
philosophic schools?
Now, I said the world.
Now, you said the world, too. That's the thing. So I'm actually going to say probably not. And only because I can't imagine an American university preceded any other universities within European culture. I would imagine the French or the English would have had one preceding it. So I'm going to say that is false.
You are correct. That is false. Now, Harvard is the oldest university in the United States.
Okay.
Still in operation and said to be the first. I'll get more into that in a bit. But the actual oldest university that is still open and in operation, that title has gone under a few different names, but it's known as the University of Al Qarawiyyin. And yes, this was in the Guinness World Records, but this actually was first established in 859 AD in Fez, Morocco.
In Morocco. Okay, now that makes sense. Okay.
Now, the whole concept of universities has changed since then, obviously. I wanted to mention this because in the United States, there's not as many universities as there is colleges, and then they also have community colleges. In Canada, we just have university and college.
So I guess, just as a little bit of an aside, what's the difference? What is the difference between a university and a college?
Well, I will tell you.
Ooh.
So a university, if we're talking about North America, and it is the same mostly all over now, but a university is, well, I'll tell you where I'll give you the basic definition.
I love basic definitions. I'm ready.
And I'm pulling this. If you're wondering where I'm getting this information from.
Would you like to know where I got my information from?
Yes, please, give me your source.
I am sourcing from the Collins English Dictionary.
I believe it's also pronounced Collins.
Yeah, it is. I apologize to everyone. So the basic meaning of university is just an institute of higher education having authority to award bachelor's or higher degrees, usually having research facilities. But if you break down the word, university comes from, of course, universe, which means
everything.
Yeah, like the whole world. And it comes from the Latin word universus. Universis, yes, that's what it says. Meaning whole, entire.
I'm imagining that's whole with a W, not with an H. So like
right.
The whole thing. Like,
yes.
Not the hole in the bagel, but like I ate the whole bagel.
Well, some universities will have bagels.
But wow. Sign me up.
So if you're thinking of a university as being a sort of a world of its own, an institution of higher education where you might live and study. So that's kind of where I got that from. That's from the Unabridged Dictionary, and also I got it from another dictionary site online.
And it's interesting too because I guess colleges were very vocational, especially in the early 20th century. And
Oh, yes, I forgot to mention that part.
Oh.
So, yeah, that's a university. So basically, it's more liberal arts degrees, sciences, graduate professional schools for people that want to kind of specialize in a specific field of study. University is larger, has a broader curriculum. College is more for, like, as you were saying, like a trade or something more specific, like it doesn't require 4 years of education usually or more.
And it's vocational
Yeah.
usually. You go there. In fact, they've had colleges set for certain trades or vocations. And yet I think it's really probably just within the later part of the 20th century, early 21st century, where we've seen this shift of the universifying of colleges, where they've really expanded, probably because colleges are mad traps for money right now due to like sporting deals and
Oh, yeah.
all sorts of incentives and investments people make into colleges.
Absolutely. Now, I wanted to break this down because we did mention the first university, according to this, is in Morocco.
Mhm.
Now, I wanted to say, well, what's the first one in Canada? What's the first one in the USA? So the first one in Canada, well, I'll ask you. You tell me if this is true or not.
Is it Bovine University?
It is not. But
Oh,
So it's either the University of Toronto, which opened in 1859, or Laval University, which is in Quebec,
mhm.
which opened in 1663.
I'm going to go with Quebecois.
You are correct. University of Toronto has been around for a long time, but I literally just made up that number right now.
Thank you.
Laval University is one of the oldest universities in Canada. It was established by the Royal Charter in 1663. It's located in Quebec, and it is one of the premier research centers in the country of Canada. But there's a lot of research that goes on there, a lot of stuff that leans towards medical research, cancer screening, things of that nature. So it's a very prestigious and well-received university, and it's been around for quite some time. In terms of the U.S., that one's a little more complicated. So I remember earlier I read that fact about Harvard. That is true. Harvard was founded in 1663, and they do claim to be the oldest institution of higher education in the United States. Where did I get that information from? Well, I got some of this information from Encyclopedia Britannica. I also got it from a few different fact books and some websites
Like
as well.
almanacs, like the National Geographic Almanac, for example. And that is
That's a good one.
that's a bit of a fact check too, because I like the fact that you have Harvard, this very reputable, very prestigious school, making this claim that is factually untrue.
Well, here's what Encyclopedia Britannica also states.
Okay.
Technically, there's 4 universities in the U.S. They kind of started as colleges, and then they kind of expanded and became universities. And the first one that comes up on the list often is, yes, Harvard, 1636. Another one that doesn't exist anymore, William and Mary University, which was in 1693. Yale, 1701. Princeton, 1746. And King's College, which is now Columbia, was in 1754. Most early American colleges were established by religious denominations and then eventually evolved into full-fledged universities. So anyways, there's some university facts for you. And then also one little bonus fact for you.
I do love me a bonus.
In terms of the Western Hemisphere, there is another early university. It was established in 1538, the University of Santa Domingo, and that's now in what is the Dominican Republic.
Ah, yes.
And then in 1539, there was one in Mexico, University of Michoacan. So there's a little bit of facts, some educational facts, we could say.
I mean, quite literally, they're about
Quite
educational institutions.
Literally.
My question then is, why would Harvard purport this? Why would they intentionally give this misinformation out, saying that they're the oldest university in existence?
Well, when it comes to the dates, theirs is 1636. The other ones are usually around that time.
I think it's very fascinating because you look at universities wanting to attract as many students as possible. And you do that often by courses that are offered, unique programs, but also through prestige. There's this notion that Yale, Harvard, these huge names are based upon the lineage that they have, having this historic establishment. And that entices people to come. In fact, that also increases tuition rates. With that said, this seems, if I may be so bold, a bit of a scam.
Well, I'm not going to go there.
I
but,
will, but
and I'm not discrediting Harvard. Obviously, they're one of the most prestigious schools, but we're just trying to find out when was the first one. And another reason why they state that they are the first university, and this was also in some of the things that I found, they were the first one mentioned as a university. So maybe, but while they were still kind of, because as I said earlier, in the U.S. it's a little bit different than Canada. They tended to call things colleges, right? So
or like you look at the UK with Trinity College, for example.
yeah, yeah. So the world was changing, right? It was still a new thing. That's why they say that. So 1636 also predates the Laval University in Canada in 1663. So one led to the other, and this is just they didn't use that term. It was still a new thing, and this is one of the first early official mentions of the term university in the U.S.
And that's also the English utterance of it, because
Yes.
you can also go to different countries and you can look at, anglicized, the University of Bologna. You can look at the Sorbonne, for example. And yeah, there's plenty of universities that exist that precede it, maybe not in the English phrasing of university.
Yes.
But yeah, I think that's very interesting because there is an element of prestige to it that does engage potential students and can attract people to apply to study there. I use the term scam, so maybe that's a bit of a misnomer, but I do think it certainly is a means to entice students to enroll to a very particular school, because with prestige comes the notion that you're going to receive a better education. It's already been proven, and maybe we'll get into this in a future episode, where a prestigious university does not necessarily indicate you're going to get a better quality education there than you will at another, what would be deemed less prestigious institution.
Right, but a lot has come from those institutions we named.
Granted, yes.
And a lot of good things have come from those institutions, and I am definitely not knocking those things, and I'm not dissuading anyone from those things. It's probably the best school you can go to in the U.S. That's one of the top ones.
So yeah, it's university. Basically, it's its own world, kind of education world, separate from thing. And some people live on campus, of course. There's dorms. So for some people, it is everything. That they live there, they sleep there, they eat there, they learn there. So that's some information.
I've seen some 80s movies where students do other things there too.
We can't talk about that. But
embarrassed crusty old deans, I think. Yeah.
Oh, you gotta watch out for those. But yeah, so I think that's pretty much what I'm covering. But you said you had another question or something to bring up.
Well, I figured this isn't really going to have a random Dave fact or question at the end of this episode because you presented all the information. So I thought, what if I share some questions with you, turning the table, as you will, and see if you can answer these questions correctly?
I don't know if I like this, but I will agree to it.
You can put that university education to the test. We are going to talk about 3 different beliefs surrounding education, and some of them will involve post-secondary education, but I decided to just broaden this to education in general within North America. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I want to hear what your thoughts are on these.
Okay.
So these will basically be 3 mini versions of fiction or nonfiction. So the first question I have to ask for you, does homework boost achievement?
I would say no. Well, it depends what grade level, really. No, actually it doesn't. I would say no, because no one really wants to do homework, but they do it anyway.
Well, okay, you don't like doing homework. That doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't boost achievement.
Well, yeah, I guess if you do a good job at your homework, your work will speak for itself, I suppose.
Okay, but on the whole, do you feel that homework actually helps students excel in their studies?
Well, yeah, it helps them kind of apply what they've been learning.
Okay.
But there's a point to it.
This is fiction.
Okay, so I was right. Homework sucks.
Well, you were right about that, but there is no evidence to show that it's actually true that homework boosts achievement levels. And I'm actually referring from a book by Alif Khan, The Homework Myth, Why Our Kids Get Too Much of a Good Thing. And I will say that this is a very US-centric title. However, because of the type of systems in place, most of what Cohn talks about is transferable to Canada. So they argue that there has been no evidence to demonstrate that homework benefits the education of students. In fact, researchers from the Curry School of Education at the University of Virginia had similar findings in a study which they published under the title, When is Homework Worth the Time? So both Cohn and the researchers reported that there is no substantial difference in the grades between students who receive homework and those who don't receive homework. By contrast, there are actually countries that do not hand out homework or hand out very little, including Finland and China. They actually have some of the highest levels of academic achievement in the world.
Well, I was gonna say, so in some classes, they count the homework as part of the percentage of your grade.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's what it is, then I guess that's different, right?
Well, then that's skewing results, because then achievement isn't so much you are managing to show a knowledge or like a comprehension of the material. It's simply that you're completing a task. So, that's a very skewed way of assigning grades. If you actually want more information about how homework can actually be detrimental to a student, you should check out Nancy Kalish's The Case Against Homework, How Homework is Hurting Our Children, and What We Can Do About It.
We're not against homework, just to let anyone know.
Maybe you aren't.
Okay. What's your next question?
Okay, the next one. Do zero tolerance policies make schools safer? Now, first off, I should ask, do you know what a zero tolerance policy is?
It means there's no leeway. They can't, if they do this, that's it. They're out.
Exactly.
Depending on what the situation is. They could be expelled, they could be kicked out, whatever.
Precisely. And it's mainly was instigated in schools in the States to stop acts of violence from occurring, meant as a deterrent, but it, of course, has made its way over to Canada. In fact, I even went to a high school that had itself a zero tolerance policy. So, with that said, these are meant to make schools safer. Do they?
I don't know.
Well, use that little brain of yours. What do you think?
My little brain. Oh,
that big old wet university brain of yours.
I don't know. I feel it really depends on the school. But I do think, yeah, it could help.
Okay. There is no evidence that zero tolerance policies decrease school violence.
How dare you ask me these questions?
So there is a book that actually tackles this. It's by a pair of authors. Their names are David Berliner and Jean Glass. And the book they have is 50 Myths and Lies That Threaten America's Public Schools. Now, in this book, there's a whole section dedicated to discussing how zero tolerance policies are potentially harmful for students. They cite many examples, including one in which 2 students were both suspended because one of the students shared an inhaler with a friend who was having an asthma attack.
Why would that be? Like, weren't they just trying to help him?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So again, because of how their zero tolerance policy went, this basically called for the students to be expelled, probably having to do something with sharing a controlled substance, I would imagine.
Okay.
So those are more extreme examples of how this is actually detrimental to students. But the authors also note, and I quote here, suspensions and expulsions have far-reaching implications for a student's academics and can set them up for failure in their personal lives. So, in other words, zero tolerance policies have resulted in schools pushing a record number of students through the juvenile justice system, because when they're expelled from school or when they're kicked out, they don't really have any other avenue to go through. And as the authors note, students who are more likely to end up in an adult prison later on are often the same ones that go through a juvenile justice system.
Isn't there anything about the other, to prove the other way that they did help?
Nope, there is absolutely no study supporting that it's beneficial.
Did they not study that?
Apparently, no.
Okay.
So I think the idea is they would take anecdotal evidence for this, saying, well, if we kicked out a student that was threatening to beat somebody up, or somebody who was a bully that was getting into fights with somebody, this would prohibit them from fighting this person in the future. And so, yes, a potential future fight could be avoided, but then this sets up the other student, rather than helping them at all, it just sets them up for a path of failure. So really what the authors of this book recommend is that zero tolerance policies should be abolished and instead replaced with more preemptive crisis intervention works and things that would actually benefit the students.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, if they don't do that, what can they do? Yeah, there should be something done, obviously. Okay, interesting.
Now, my final question actually relates to colleges. So this is very in tune with what you were saying before. So, college admissions. Are they based on academic achievement?
In Canada or America?
Give me both.
I would say they're like to get into a college, you're asking?
College admission, yeah.
Yeah. I think that they have to be somewhat based on that. But I think for a college, it's different than a university, because university is really, really on the marks. Like, what did you get? What's your percentage? Blah, 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 blah. I think for college, I don't know. I didn't go, but like, I think I know it's different.
Okay. So before I give the answer, I'm just going to reference again the previous authors we were talking about, Berliner and Glass. Now, they actually offer some disturbing findings. Many colleges and universities, both in Canada and the US, practice admissions by category. So this is not just by academic achievement. There are various categories that people can excel in order to reach admission standards. One example is athletics.
Mm-hmm.
We know, yeah, it's a huge one, especially stateside. When you look at college teams, how a lot of students are basically culled from high schools in order to bolster said team for college, because there's huge money in that.
Yeah.
But the most significant variable at 30 of the most selective universities was discovered to be legacy, which is whether a family member previously attended that university. And you have to figure wealthy parents who contribute development funds to further increase, let's say things like building new annexes of buildings or just bolstering the financial aid or prestige of a school, well, it's more likely that their children will be admitted into said universities. I'm not trying to say that academic achievement is not a factor in these decisions at all. Of course, they do pay attention to this, but this does mean that there is preferential treatment in admissions that basically means academic accomplishments become a lower priority than they ought to be.
In some situations.
In some situations. So that one is also not strictly a fiction, but is something that you can argue, unfortunately, is not enforced as much as it probably ought to be. And yeah, those are three, I guess we can now say, myths about the education system that we explored.
Question for you. Your cup is very close to the edge of the table, and I'm just wondering why.
Well, I was going to teach you something about physics. Dave, sit underneath the table, and let's see if this water will pour on your head.
No.
Okay, well, with that said, he's a good student. Dave, I want to thank you for sharing your university information with me. And for the listeners out there, if you have any questions that you would like us to tackle on fiction or nonfiction, you can send an email to askalibrarian@windsorpubliclibrary.com and put inside the subject line, fiction or nonfiction. Until next time, though, I'm Adam.
I'm Dave.
And this has been Fiction
or Nonfiction.